Willkommen in einem anderen Video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case covering the Battle of Cannae. This was a battle fought between the Carthaginians and Romans on the 2nd of August 216 BC, close to the town of Cannae. This video is mainly focused on looking at this battle from a figure gaming point of view, which includes the order of battle, troop types and the flow of the battle. If you wish a big picture of why the battle was fought, then this may not be the video for you. But if you want to know about the troop types, force mixes and what actually occurred on the battlefield, then continue to watch this video. While I have to admit there are some reasonable sources of this battle by ancient standards, there is, as normal, a lot of gaps which can only be filled by guesswork. I will select the version which seems the most reasonable and use that as my baseline. But I will mention other sources and other theories as well. Let's first cover the order of battle and troop types of the Roman army. According to Polybius, the Roman force consisted of 86,400 men. That was broken up into 80,000 infantry and 6,400 cavalry. While confirming numbers is almost impossible, this is about the best number that we have. I suspect this is based on the Romans raising 8 legions, each of which consists of 5,000 infantry in an emergency and 300 cavalry, with a associated allied force of, or equivalent legions of 5,000 men each and 900 cavalry each. The book and board game Lost Battles shows the Roman army consisting of 12 average legionnaires, 1 average light infantry, 2 levy light infantry and 3 average heavy cavalry. If the cavalry represents 6,400 cavalry, then each unit represents about 2,100 cavalry or men. Based on this ratio, the 12 average legionnaires represents about 25,200 legionnaires, which is very low. The scale for the infantry is probably closer to 3,800 men per unit. Now, I will not use these sources, but because I have actually better sources from Polybius, but I thought I'd just include it here so you could see how some of the board games attempt to simulate the battle. Another board game, the SPI Spartan board game, which is part of the Pre-Stag series, has the Roman army consisting of 20 units of swordsmen, 8 units of militia spearmen, probably allied troops or maybe even triarii, 9 barbarian infantry, I'm guessing allied forces, and 3 skirmish units. As this totals 45 units, I expect each unit represents about 2,000 men. Part of the Roman army was guarding a camp, probably 14,000. Maybe this is the group that escaped. This means the army consisted of 72,400 men in size, so each unit, when you use that ratio, represents 1,600 men. As all the cavalry was probably present and it numbered 6,400, then dividing this by 1,600 gives us 4, which is probably the correct ratio, and which actually represents the number of units in this board game. Look, there's an enormous amount of guesswork here, and I have some real issues with this order of battle, and as a result I'm not going to be using this for this analysis, but once again I thought I'd show you how some board games managed to reproduce the Battle of Cannae using their particular board game systems. This quote comes from Wiki, but seems reasonable. Per contemporary Roman sources, for the first time the Senate introduced 8 legions, each consisting of 5,000 foot soldiers and 300 cavalry, with allied troops numbering the same of foot soldiers but 900 cavalry per legion, more than triple the legion numbers. 8 legions, some 40,000 Roman soldiers and an estimated 2,400 cavalry formed the core of this massive new army. As we actually have some good source material from Polybius concerning the structure of the Roman legion, let's just go over it. Polybius indicates a legion consists of 4,200 men, but could be filled out to 5,000 men in an emergency. The legion consisted of 1,200 hastati, 1,200 principes, and 600 triarii. Polybius does not mention this, but we could assume there may be 1,200 velites, or light skirmish troops as well, which gives us our 4,200 men. The legion had a cavalry force of 300, although I'm uncertain if this was in addition to the 4,200 or had to be or was separate. The source I'm using assumes this was separate, so I'm going to assume in most cases cavalry was counted separately. If the legion was raised to 5,000 men in an emergency, and I would have to assume this was an emergency, I'm uncertain what this actually means in terms of troop organisation. Could it simply mean more velites? I'm uncertain. Goldsworth states that triarii were not increased in numbers, so perhaps all the rest were. The most logical assumption was the century size increased from 60 to 80 men, so each maniple consisted of 160 men instead of 120 men. This gives you a strength of 5,000 foot. Goldsworth also claims the legion could reach a size of 6,000 men, possibly by increasing the size of the velites companies as well as the other formations, although, again, this is simply a guess. Dando-Collins states that by 218 BC, the legion's strength had increased to 5,200 foot and 300 cavalry. Once again, the composition is unknown, but the easy assumption is the triarii century size was also increased to 80 men, as well as all the other centuries. Just for comparison purposes, this shows the structure of a standard consular army. At Cannae, the Romans deployed twice the number of legions, as is shown here, and they each may have been at a much greater strength than shown here as well. Let's now drill down into troop types. Now, I've used the latest DBMM army list to give me an idea of the troop types available to the Romans in this period. This shows the core troops available for the Romans during the entire period between 275 BC and 105 BC. Let's start with the Roman cavalry. Now, the Romans had 2,400 Roman cavalry, which is, of course, 8 legions by 300. And they were considered as reasonable quality or ordinary, as you can see here in the army list. On the Roman left flank, the Romans had about 3,600 allied cavalry, with a quarter being reasonable quality, according to the army list, and the remainder as inferior. Now, according to this, the Romans also used a light horse from Numidia, Illyria, or Thracia. However, it's unlikely the Romans had any light cavalry, although it is possible part of the allied cavalry may have consisted of Tarentinan light cavalry. While this army list shows that the Romans are able to field Gaelic or Spanish cavalry, at Cannae there is almost no way that they would have possessed any of this sort of type of cavalry. Now, in Spain, the Roman army may well have had allied Spanish cavalry. Now we come to the bedrock of the Roman army, which were their legionnaires, or the specific troop types called hastati and principes. It's assumed the allies were armed in the Roman manner, and thus they also had troops that were similar to this, although there is an option which we'll look at later, which allows the Romans to field the Roman allies in their traditional form. Now, in the army list, we have something called levies. Now, these must have been the velites. I'm uncertain why they're called levies in this army list. Later, you can upgrade these troops to a higher quality, and these are called velites. So possibly levies were something that were raised before velites were used commonly. I'm not 100% certain. Now we come to a bit of an unusual troop type for the Roman army, the triarii. These were spear-armed Romans, normally in the third line and consisting of the most experienced and probably oldest troops. I have to assume that some of these troops may not have been very experienced, considering how quickly so many legions were raised. Now, one practice the Romans undertook was they selected the highest quality allied troops to form a special reserve formation, which is what this troop type represents. I'm uncertain if they existed in this battle, but it's probably reasonable that some kind of formations like this were actually formed, possibly behind the allied wings. The army list allows the Romans to have Cretan or other Greek archers. Look, it's possible some of these troop types may have been present at Cannae, but there's certainly no historical references supporting that. The army list also allowed the Romans to field slingers, Syracusan or Trallian slingers. Now, as with archers, it's possible some of these slingers were present, but if they were, it was in very small numbers, and I certainly have found no historical references stating that they were there. As with the cavalry, it's very unlikely that any Spanish or Illyrian foot was present in the Roman army. I mean, look, it's possible that maybe very small numbers of Illyrian foot may have been here, but once again, I severely doubt it. What we've covered is all the standard troops the Romans could field between the years of 275 BC and 105 BC. Let's now drill down to the specific troops that the Romans would have only been able to field during the Battle of Cannae. Now, some of the Roman legions may have been raw. Considering how they were raised, this is probably a very reasonable assumption. And the final special modification for this specific period is that some of the Allied infantry may have been deployed in their traditional form, which would have been in a looser formation armed possibly with javelins or spears. Now let's cover the Carthaginian army. The Carthaginian army was varied to say the least, but Hannibal had a corps of highly experienced veterans with a large number of Gallic troops supporting him. So let's drill down and determine what kind of troop types Hannibal was likely to have been able to field at Cannae. Let's now start with the lost battle order of battle. Now, unlike the Roman order of battle, this is a lot more reasonable, but as there are much better sources, I'm not going to really use this, and I've only displayed it here as an FYI. This shows the force mix according to the SPI Spartan board game. Once again, the actual force mix that you see here is probably a lot better than the Roman one, which I have some real questions about. However, there are better sources, and I'm only showing this as an FYI. Looking at a far better source material from historical material written closer to the period, the estimated army that the Carthaginians had was 8,000 Libyans, 5,000 Gautians, 16,000 Gauls, mainly Aboli and Insuribes. 8,000 were left at the camp at the day of the battle, and 8,000 of several tribes of Hispania, including Iberians, Celtiberians, and Lusitanians. In addition, there were 4,000 Numidian cavalry, 2,000 Iberian Peninsula cavalry, 4,000 Gallic cavalry, and 450 Libby-Phoenician cavalry. Finally, in the skirmish area, there was a contingent of about 1,000 to 2,000 Balearic slingers, and 6,000 mixed nationality javelmen, probably including Lusitanians among them. This shows the force mix which I've just mentioned in a TONE form. Now, the Libyans and Spanish were almost certainly equipped with captured Roman armour, although they almost certainly retained their traditional fighting style. It's also possible many of the Gallic troops decided to pick up some Roman armour as well. As I did with the Romans, this is the DBMM version 2.1 army list, which is the latest one, and this shows the core troops of the Carthaginian army between the years of 275 BC and 146 BC. This list is small because the Carthaginian armies of various battles were very dependent on what troops were around, but these were generally always present. Starting with the core cavalry, the Carthaginians had 450 Libby-Phoenician cavalry, and they're considered as standard or ordinary according to the DBMM army list. The Carthaginians would have possessed, or did possess, about 4,000 Numidian cavalry, which were used to pin down the Roman cavalry on the Carthaginian right flank. The core infantry of the Carthaginian army were the Libyan spearmen, and these were the highest quality troops within the Carthaginian army. They would have been almost certainly equipped with captured Roman armour. Going to the skirmish area, the Carthaginians had about 6,000 javelmen. Some of them may have been armed with bows or slings, and they consisted of a wide range of different nationalities, Libyan, Moorish or Numidians. The army list shows bolt shooters. I'm really unaware the Carthaginians used bolt shooters in this battle. I suspect not. Now let's drill down to the specific options. Now these are the specific options for Carthage before 201 BC, which does cover our Cannae battle year of 216 BC. This is where we see the Spanish cavalry, and the Carthaginians had 2,000 Spanish cavalry, most of which were medium cavalry, of ordinary quality, but according to the army list, they could also deploy light horse. We also have the Spanish foot in this particular addendum. Carthaginians had 8,000 Spanish foot, most of which would have been medium infantry. I suspect any skirmishers were in the skirmish total. Now we come to the slingers. The Carthaginians did have between 1,000 and 2,000 Balearic slingers. The army list shows elephants. No elephants, to the best of my knowledge, were present in this battle. Now there is a second addendum, and this is the Carthaginians only if before 201 BC and not in Spain, and the Battle of Cannae was not conducted in Spain. This is really where all the Gaelic troops are included. The Carthaginians had 4,000 Gaelic cavalry, most of which were medium cavalry. The Carthaginians had at least 16,000 Gaelic infantry, half of which were kept in the camp. I suspect this number was actually greater than the remainder of 8,000, because there is a troop type in the sources that I'm using, which I'm uncertain where they came from, and I suspect they were simply a type of Gaelic infantry. So I would probably add another 5,500 to the 8,000 that were present at the battle. The Carthaginians also could field Ligurians. I'm uncertain how many of this troop type were in the Carthaginian army, and the tribe that was referred to in my source material, 5,500 men, may very well have been a type of Ligurian. I'm uncertain. Nonetheless, they're pretty similar to Gaelic foot, I suppose. Now, there are a couple of other special options. Only if from 221 BC to 202 BC, and the CNC is Hannibal in Spain, Gaul, Italy, which means it counts, and also only Hannibal in Italy from 216 BC to 203 BC. Well, 216 is when the battle occurred. This is the options which allow you to have a very good CNC, which is Hannibal, and also where you upgrade all your troops based, from captured Roman equipment. According to this, we can upgrade our Libyan spearmen as veterans in captured Roman equipment. This is when our Libyans get the Roman equipment and display additional skills, so they're superior troop and, as a result, extremely good troops. We can also upgrade our Gaelic cavalry to regular, as distinct from irregular. Now, this basically means they're easier to command. There is no doubt that when they were under Hannibal, they operated in a very professional manner, so this actually is quite a reasonable upgrade for Cannae. Now, the final option is Italian infantry. Now, it's unlikely Hannibal had any Italian allies at this battle. There may have been a very small number, but I would suspect it would be fairly insignificant. As a general rule, the DBMM army list I find is extremely reasonable. I actually really like the army list. I think an enormous amount of energy and effort has been placed into making sure that it's as accurate as possible over an incredibly wide historical period. Anyway, let's look at the battlefield. This shows a modern monument near the site of the Battle of Cannae, and as you can see here, there is a lot of very flat ground. Now, there is an enormous amount of disagreement on the location of the actual battlefield. This is the deployment according to Wiki. The Carthaginian left flank breaks through and swings over to the rear of the Roman left flank to assist the Numidians. Meanwhile, the Roman centre advances. This seems fairly reasonable in terms of a sequence of events. Now, the Roman left flank is broken because of the Carthaginian cavalry, and the Numidians pursue all the Roman cavalry. The Carthaginian cavalry now swings back and hits the Roman infantry in the rear. In the meantime, the African infantry engage the Roman flanks and start pushing it back, while the Roman centre continues to advance into the pocket. Most historians feel the battle occurred on the same side of the river as the town of Cannae, but the course of the battle is probably correct. We have another account, in this case from Warfare in the Classical World by John Worry. I suspect the actual map that you see here and deployment is more accurate than the previous map that I showed you. However, some battlefield events in this account does seem a little bit suspect. Anyway, the sequence is as follows. The Romans take up battle lines, Hannibal follows suit. The Romans form up extra deep because of the narrowness of the plain. Their aim is to crush Hannibal's centre. Hannibal pins his hope on his cavalry, placing his heavy cavalry on the left and the Numidians on the right. He bows his centre forward, also making it deeper than the flanks in order to delay the legion's advance. The African infantry is kept in reserve behind each flank of the crescent. Both sides leave troops to guard the camps. The Roman aim is to capture Hannibal's camp. The battle opens with skirmishing. Hannibal's left flank cavalry are launched against the Romans and hit the Roman right, which gives way under the weight of numbers. The heavy infantry clash and the Spaniards and Celts are forced back. The Numidians skirmish with the allied cavalry, while Hasdrubal swings his heavy cavalry across the back of the Roman infantry towards the allies. Thus threatened, they break and run, taking Varro with them. Meanwhile, the crescent is holding and the Africans advance in columns on the flank and then turn inward. Hasdrubal turns into the Roman rear while the Carthaginian light troops move around into the rear as well as supporting the centre. Paulus strives to keep the Romans fighting, even ordering his escorts to dismount, but to no avail. 45,500 infantry and 2,700 cavalry are killed. 300 to 500 infantry and 1,000 to 2,000 cavalry are captured. Paulus, Servilius and Minucius are dead. 7,000 escape to the smaller camp, 2,000 to Cannae, but they are surrounded and captured. Hannibal takes both camps and more prisoners. He has lost about 6,000 to 8,000 infantry. Most historians think the Carthaginians held Cannae during the battle, as it contained their supplies. Also, the Carthaginian cavalry first assisted the Numidians before hitting the Romans in the rear, but otherwise the account's probably generally accurate. One of the best accounts of Cannae that I've ever seen comes from the History Marchi channel on YouTube. This shows the position of the opposing forces in the morning while the Romans were forming up for battle. The Romans are on the right and the Carthaginians on the left. According to this account, the battlefield was 2,000 metres wide, with a river on the Carthaginian left and rough ground on the right. You'll also notice Cannae is controlled by the Carthaginians, with a small detachment in the town. In this account, Hannibal's army, deployed on the field, consisted of 50,000 men, with the Roman army consisting of 86,400 men. This is probably as good a number as any as I've ever seen, so I would not particularly doubt it, and there's some good breakdowns in the individual troops as well, which kind of matches what I've already spoken about so far. In this image we see the two lines slowly closing together, with the Carthaginian left flank engaging first, quickly defeating the Roman cavalry, which begins to rout. We now see both main lines engaging, with the Romans pushing back the Carthaginian centre, which had been extended towards the Romans, so to allow it to retreat further, or to make it possible for it to retreat further if required, which is exactly what was required. As the battle continues, the Romans are on the verge of breaking through the Carthaginian centre, but you'll notice the Carthaginians had unengaged troops on either side. These were the Libyan spearmen. They were ready to drive into the Roman flanks when required. While the main battle occurred, we can see the Carthaginian cavalry now returning from their pursuit, with the Roman cavalry on the Roman left flank being the target. According to this account, Varro saw this and ordered the retreat of this cavalry, and the Medians chased after them. With the Carthaginian centre in retreat, the Carthaginian ordered the Libyan spearmen forward, which then struck the Roman flanks and disrupted their advance. Behind, the Carthaginian cavalry were also approaching the Romans. With the Carthaginian cavalry finally engaging the Romans in the rear, the encirclement is now complete. You'll notice the Roman flanks were not encircled, only the central forces. I suppose this was to allow or to explain how 14,000 Romans escaped. The result was a total disaster for the Romans. I would encourage anyone to seek out the History Marchi channel on YouTube. The link provided at the end of this video and also in the description only covers this specific battle. There are other videos which cover the manoeuvring which occurred prior to the battle, and I find this actually incredibly interesting. The Carthaginians changed their camp, I think, 3 times from memory, and the Romans did the same. And there was an enormous amount of manoeuvring that occurred before the actual engagement. Often when gamers refight a battle, they start at the point both sides are ready to engage. Most battles, really did consist of a lot of manoeuvring prior to this, with each side trying to achieve an advantage over the other, and this manoeuvring often caused victory or loss. Now, I've played this battle several times using the Lost Battles game, using figures, and plan on creating a figure game version of SPI's Spartan board game, which I will use to refight this battle as well, and I've done so several times. This is a hard battle to create a scenario for. Lost Battle does it by giving command a major significance. The SPI Pre-Stags game system does it by having both sides reasonably equal in strength. I suspect Lost Battles may have the better approach, but I must admit the importance that those rules give to generals is rather surprising. It's almost as if you have, if you have enough general power, you're going to win or not win. I suppose it may be the only way to get a historical result. Now, with the pre-stag games, clearly what they've done is the unit scale has been modified based on the quality of troops, and this certainly works, but I tend to believe that it may be a better system to actually have a consistent troop scale and then just have rules for quality so you can actually see what was really occurring. But anyway, that works as well. And so we come to the end of my part 8 of my military history videos, in this case covering the Battle of Cannae. I find this battle an excellent test of any game system. If you can reproduce this battle with a historical outcome, then you know your game system is reasonably good. If you can't, then you probably need to go back and do a bit of tweaking. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.